Social Security and our health entitlement programs face exhaustion. Yet when it comes to negotiating...
See the rest of this hearing on our website, cspan.org. Quickly, Associated Press sources are reporting this hour that there may be progress on resolving debt ceiling issues. House Speaker Boehner is expected to ask House Republicans for a short-term debt ceiling increase. Well, the U.S. Senate is about to gavel in, and they'll have more speeches today on the government shutdown and the debt limit, of course. Majority Leader Reid expecting to make a motion that sets up a vote possibly this weekend to move forward on legislation to suspend the debt limit until the end of next year.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Immortal and wise God, may the memory of your past mercies sustain us during these challenging times. As we have reached the 10th day of this federal shutdown, strengthen our senators with your might, preserving them with your grace, and instructing them with your wisdom. Inspire them to take a step back from partisanship and to take a step forward toward patriotism, striving to strengthen and not weaken this land we love. Lord, make them alive and alert to the spiritual values which underlie all the struggle of this challenging season. Direct their going out and coming in as you energize them with your presence. We pray in your strong name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., October 10, 2013, to the Senate. On the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Brian Schatz, a senator from the state of Hawaii, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Patrick J. Leahy, President Pro Tempore.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
I move to proceed to count number 211, the debt limit bill.
The clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 211, S. 1569, a bill to ensure the complete and timely payment of the obligations of the United States government until December 31st, 2014.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Following leader remarks, the time until 1 o'clock this afternoon will be equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees. At 1 p.m., the Senate will recess, subject to call the chair to allow for a special caucus meeting with the President. I am told, Mr. President, there are 4 measures at the desk due for second readings.
The Senator is correct. The clerk will read the titles of the bills for the second time.
H.J.Res 84, making continuing appropriations for Head Start for fiscal year 2014 and for other purposes. H.J.Res 89, making appropriations for the salaries and related expenses of certain federal employees during a lapse in funding authority for fiscal year 2014 and so forth and for other purposes. H.J.Res 90, making continuing appropriations for the Federal Aviation Administration for fiscal year 2014 and for other purposes. H.J.Res 91, making continuing appropriations for death gratuities and related survivor benefits for survivors of deceased military service members and so forth and for other purposes.
Mr. President, I would object for the proceedings with respect to any of these measures.
The objection is heard. The bills will be placed on the calendar.
The President issued a warning to Congress, quote, full consequence of a default by the United States or even the serious prospect of a default by the United States are impossible to predict and awesome to contemplate. Denigration of the full faith and credit of the United States would have substantial effects on the domestic financial markets and the value of the dollar in exchange markets. The President went on to warn of the risks cost, the disruptions, and the incalculable damage of failing to avert such a default. This was not Barack Obama. It was Ronald Reagan in 1983. 4 years later, in 1987, he again warned Congress about the impacts on default of our debts. Here's what he said, and this is a quote: "This brinksmanship threatens the holders of government bonds and those who rely on Social Security and veterans' benefits. Interest rates would skyrocket. Instability would occur in financial markets, and the federal deficit would soar." Close quote. And yet, Mr. President, 3 decades later, an alarming number of Republicans have denied or downplayed the seriousness of the first-ever default on the full faith and credit of the United States. To these deniers, East is West, North is South, black is white, and right is wrong. Let's talk about what this raising the debt actually means. It simply means we're going to pay our bills. It's not a vote to spend more money to authorize new programs or buy new things. It's a vote to pay the bills. The federal government has already incurred these bills. Bills for roads and bridges. We've already built them. For warships we've already commissioned. Wars that have been waged. And tax breaks that have been charged on a national credit card. A vote to avert default is a vote to pay the bills for all these things and more. Many Republicans are in the press today and have been for the last week or 10 days arguing that why worry about it? It'll all work out. These same Republicans who argue that we should default on the nation's bills voted time and time again to spend borrowed money, and lots of it, without any regard to the long-term effect it would have. These Republicans voted to sell government bonds to China, Saudi Arabia, Japan, to pay for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Mr. President, Republican senators have come to this floor and lamented raising the debt. We have to raise this debt because of 2 unpaid wars costing trillions of dollars, tax breaks for the wealthy costing trillions of dollars, all given to the rich with borrowed money, wars fought with borrowed money. During the Bush administration, these same Republicans were happy to run up America's credit card to the tune of trillions of dollars. Their theory was, let's lower the taxes, it'll be great for the economy. They're now howling about the debts they created, the debts they voted for. Never mind, Mr. President, with little help from the Republicans in Congress, President Barack Obama, has reduced the ratio of deficit to gross domestic product from 9% to 4%. Pretty good. In spite of the debt that he's been trying to get charge of, it wasn't his. Now that the bill for Republicans' own excesses have come due, the bill for wars they supported and tax cut they received, they're not willing to pay. They want to walk out on that check. Many of these same Republicans also say we can avoid default by prioritizing whom to pay and when we pay them. They say we should pay foreign debt holders first. They all agree with that. China would be first, and I guess Saudi Arabia, and then maybe Japan. But you know, Mr. President, we shouldn't and couldn't pay Social Security recipients under that scenario, veterans or Medicare. No matter how much we would want to, we couldn't do it. There'd be no money to do it. In addition to having shockingly skewed priorities, Republicans are also using very, very flawed logic. Here's a real-world example. Mr. President, let's say you have a mortgage, a car payment, and a cell phone bill. And the presiding officer decides, well, which one should I pay? can't pay them all. Which one should I pay? Doesn't matter. You pick one of them, you've defaulted anyway because you can't pay your bills. You likely would never be able to buy another car, cell phone, certainly not a house. Your credit would be ruined for the foreseeable future. Mr. President, the same thing would happen to our country. 1 week from today, and that's not a definite time, it could be a couple days before, a couple days after, but we're there. So let's say a week from now. Use that as a point of reference. The United States has no money. They can't borrow anymore. The federal government paid China but failed to pay Social Security recipients unemployment benefits or the salaries of our men and women fighting in uniform. The damage, not only to our credit rating, world credit rating, but also to our global reputation, would be profound and irreversible. The risks, the costs, disruptions, and the damage would be incalculable. That's what President Ronald Reagan said. Why don't they listen to this man that they say is such a great leader, and was? And I agree. He was a tremendous president. I didn't agree with him all the time, but he was a real leader. He, more than anyone else, is responsible for ending the Cold War. But there are many, many who say that he couldn't fit in the Republican Party of today. Robert Dole, who was the majority leader of the United States Senate from the state of Kansas, this patriotic American, said himself he doesn't fit in the Republican Party of today. So, Mr. President, the stakes couldn't be higher. Global economic recession and possibly even depression face this great country. That's why President Obama reached out to House Republicans, inviting them to the White House yesterday afternoon. Guess what they said? No, we're too busy. We'll send a few of us, but we're too busy. Remember, the House is led by the same man who said he wanted to have a conversation, but they were unwilling to have one with him. So I was disappointed to hear that the same intractable Republican leaders who caused the current government shutdown were unwilling to even allow their members to meet with the President for a constructive conversation. Again, we'll send, I think they picked 17 out of the 232 they have. This great conversation is one I guess they don't want. They want to talk, their actions tell another story. They've caused enough economic turmoil with the reckless shutdown of the federal government. And now, if that's not enough, now we have the debt ceiling coming in about a week. The Republican forced default on the nation's debt would be magnitudes worse than the damage they've already caused to our great country with this senseless, created government shutdown. Yesterday, Fidelity, the nation's largest mutual fund manager, $500 billion in assets, announced it would sell all of its short-term government bonds because of the threat of default. Today there will be more. Yesterday, government bonds were considered the safest investment in the world. Will it be so tomorrow? Time will only tell. But if the United States fails to pay its bills, that safe haven will disappear very quickly. We're going to have a vote Saturday on the ability to proceed to a clean debt ceiling. We'll find out how Senate Republicans want to proceed. Economists say the consequences of not paying our bills, not extending the debt ceiling, would be immediate and catastrophic. This isn't a bunch of Harvard left-wingers, Mr. President. Even Republican economist Douglas Aiken said debt deniers are dead wrong. This is what he said, I quote, "A failure to raise the debt ceiling leads to very bad economic outcomes and chaos in financial markets." Fidelity's move is only the first sign of economic chaos that will continue to spread the closer America comes defaulting on its bills. With every day that passes, it's more and more important for Republicans to stop denying the reality of default and start working with us to find common ground. Mr. President, all we've said, open the government, let us pay our bills. We'll negotiate with them on anything. We'll have a conversation with them about anything. Open the government, let us pay our bills. Then we'll negotiate.
Mr. President.
Republican leader.
I'd like to start this morning by quoting something my good friend, the Majority Leader, said back in 2007, back when Congress was weighing whether or not to raise the debt ceiling. Here's what the Majority Leader said back then. Until we change the policies that led down this path, we'll be back year and year digging the hole even deeper. And of course, that's essentially what so many Americans are saying today. If we're going to address the debt ceiling, then let's also address the root causes of the debt. It just makes good sense. You'd think our friend, the Majority Leader, would continue to agree with this logic as well, but that's not what he's been saying lately. He's basically saying it would be irresponsible for Congress to address the most pressing problem we face as a country, that it would be reckless to raise the debt ceiling if that also meant doing something about the debt. In other words, he now seems to think the best thing to do about our crushing federal debt is to do nothing at all. That's why my friend, the Majority Leader, introduced legislation this week to allow another $1 trillion to be added to the debt with no strings attached at all, none, just a $1 trillion debt ceiling increase. Just keep raising the credit card limit and let someone else deal with it later on. We've now got a debt close to $17 trillion, nearly double what it was in 2007. We're borrowing nearly $2 billion a day, $2 billion a day. And apparently, our friends on the other side are fine with that. They want us to give Washington a free pass to borrow and spend $1 trillion more. He's so comfortable with all this that my friend, the Majority Leader, rejected the President's own proposal this week to do a short-term increase, followed by a negotiation on reforms. Well, in my view, we were sent here to solve problems, not defer them. We were sent here to confront the challenges of the moment, not ignore them. And that's why the Majority Leader's proposal just won't fly, because it's completely at odds with the wishes of most Americans. And that's something the President and a lot of other Senate Democrats agree with when a Republican President was asking for a debt limit increase. And of course, the problem's a lot more serious now than it was back then. Here's something else. Neither side wants to default on our debts. Neither side will allow it. That's certainly the case, and people should know that. It's irresponsible to do nothing about the debt, and it's irresponsible to be stirring up anxiety about default. But that doesn't mean the American people are wrong to ask that a debt limit increase include reforms aimed at actually tackling the problems that got us in this position in the first place, especially since what our country has routinely done in the past is just that. Going back to the Eisenhower administration, requests to raise the debt ceiling have often been tied to important fiscal reforms, nearly 24 times, going back to the Eisenhower administration. That's how we got Graham-Rudman-Hollings in the 1980s. That's how we achieved balanced budgets in the 1990s. That's how we secured significant spending reductions in President Obama's first term, spending reductions he later campaigned on. Now, President Obama seems to think Congress should just increase the borrowing limit on his already maxed out credit card, without a single negotiation. He seems to think the representatives of the American people should just do what he says, when he says it, because he says it, no questions asked. No questions asked. You know, that's just, it's not just irresponsible. It's not the way presidents of both parties have dealt with this problem in the past. Reagan negotiated, Clinton negotiated. And if President Obama wants America to increase the credit limit, he'll negotiate too. I'd also like to address one of the president's favorite talking points these days. He says he won't negotiate over, and I'm quoting here, the bills Congress has already racked up. Look, if the president actually believed his own talking point, he wouldn't threaten to veto virtually every Republican attempt to get spending under control. We've tried endlessly. The only times we can even get him to discuss sensible budget reforms is when he's absolutely forced to, when Washington has to deal with things like the debt ceiling. So let's drop the tired talking point and just get about negotiating. I know the president doesn't like the fact that Americans elected divided government, but they did. We have divided government. No matter how much he tries to divide us, at the end of the day, he's going to have to deal with a Congress he doesn't entirely control. The American people can be persuaded to raise the debt ceiling, but they're not in any mood to simply hand over a blank check. They're looking for sensible reforms. So if the president wants to increase his credit limit, let's get to the table and negotiate. He's been inviting members of Congress to the White House this week. In fact, we were just told earlier today Senate Republicans have been invited to meet with the president tomorrow morning. That's a good start, but only if it means he's decided to drop his refusal to negotiate on solutions. Because if this is just a meeting where he simply reiterates that he won't negotiate, then it certainly won't be very productive. I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the time until 1 p.m. will be equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees.
Mr. President.
Assistant Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I received an email this morning from an old friend. He's the father of a disabled veteran. This veteran is a quadriplegic, a victim of a roadside bomb in Iraq. He's gone through multiple surgeries. At some point, most people had given up on him. In fact, they even talked about his, at the age of 24, being sent to a nursing home for the rest of his life. His father said, no, we're not going to let that happen to our son. He brought him to Chicago, where he received extraordinary treatment at the Rehab Institute, and he started his slow, steady climb back in life. He's home now. He's a father, married, 2 small children. Mom and Dad live with him to help out. The people in the community that he lives in, it's not in Illinois, it's in North Carolina, but the people in that community have just been so generous, building the perfect home for him in his wheelchair and giving him as many opportunities as he could possibly enjoy in his life. It's a great story of a great family and a great American hero. The father wrote me an email today and said, we're worried. We're worried about the November disability check. Senator, we need it. We need that check. I wrote back to him and I said, I'll move heaven and earth and do everything I can to make sure that payment's made, and I believe it will be made. Somehow it'll be made. But I had to tell him that we are facing an unnecessary crisis in America created by politicians on Capitol Hill. Shutting down the government of the United States of America, what does that say about our nation? What does it say about us in the Senate and the House that they've reached this point? That we are deciding, today they listed 4 or 5 bills that just passed the House. You see, the House is deciding what little agency of government, what little spending program they will approve each day. Each day. It's estimated it will take them almost 2.5 months to fully fund the government at this pace. 2.5 months of uncertainty as they decide day by day what little program, what little agency they'll reopen. Well, that's just plain wrong. And every time they've offered that, we've said to them, open the government. It's essential. We had this story 2 or 3 days ago about 5 American families notified that they had lost their sons and husbands and brothers killed in Afghanistan. Traditionally, the United States government comes through quickly after the tragic information is shared with the family to give them a financial helping hand, to arrange for them to come to Dover, Delaware for the arrival and return of their fallen hero. But because of the government shutdown brought on by the Republicans, there was a question as to whether we could even make that payment. Luckily, a charity stepped forward, Fisher House, an extraordinary charity that just does so many great things for veterans who are disabled and need help. And they said, we're going to step in and help these families until the government gets its act together, until the politicians reopen the government. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel announced yesterday this new agreement. Well, God bless the Fisher House charity, but it shouldn't have been necessary. If we had done our job, it wouldn't be necessary. The government would be open. This family that I love, this disabled veteran, wouldn't be worried about that next check if we simply did the responsible thing and opened the government. And then there's a second issue, which, hard to believe, is even larger in scope. You see, the Republicans refuse to give us a chance to extend the debt ceiling of America. What is the debt ceiling? It sounds, in fact, this morning I listened as the minority leader said, it's raising the credit card limit. No, it isn't. That's not an accurate statement. It is raising the authority of our government to borrow money to pay for what we've already spent. Many of the same politicians who voted for the spending bills now don't want to pay for them. They don't want to extend this debt ceiling, the credit of the United States. That is totally irresponsible. It's ordering the biggest meal on the menu and then refusing to pay when the bill comes. That's where they stand. That's what they're arguing. But it's even worse. It would be the first time in the history of the United States of America that we will have defaulted on our national debt, the first time that we've called into question the full faith and credit of the United States of America. How serious is it? Let me tell you how serious it is. Pick up the morning paper. World leaders fear a default by the United States in the Washington Post. And I read it, and it says, and I quote, that default scenario is bringing increasingly urgent pleas from foreign leaders. Some who describe their grave concern, others who chide the United States about the risks of political brinksmanship, beg its leaders to act responsibly and wonder whether the world's superpower is showing some cracks. Now, are you ready for this? You know who preaches to us yesterday about responsibility in governing the United States of America? Are you ready for this? This is highly important for all of us. Russian President Vladimir Putin said, I am hopeful that all the political forces in the United States will be able to resolve this crisis as quickly as possible. So now we're being preached to by President Putin about how to run a country. Well, that's embarrassing. And it's totally unnecessary. The failure to extend the debt limit of the United States is irresponsible and reckless. And it isn't just the Russians who are calling us to task. Our closest allies in the United Kingdom, analysts there say the outlook for the British economy is decent but still fairly fragile. Anything like a U.S. debt default with significant global repercussions would be bad news for the United Kingdom. That was from Howard Archer, chief UK economist at IHS Global Insight in London. The Japanese, now emerging from a terrible economic circumstance, one of our greatest creditors. And they're worried about their debtor, the United States, paying its debts. Is anyone else embarrassed by this? We all should be. This is a creation of politicians in Washington. The Republican shutdown, the Republican refusal to extend the debt ceiling is irresponsible and reckless. It will not only hurt these foreign nations, it will not only hurt the reputation of the United States as an economic leader in the world, it's going to hurt families and businesses all over the United States. Don't take the word of this Democratic senator. Go to the Business Roundtable, one of the strongest supporters of the Republicans in Congress, sent us a letter last week and called the default on America's debt catastrophic, begging Republicans and Democrats, not to do anything this senseless. And what impact will it have on families? Hold on tight. Watch what happens as we get up to this cliff or go over it when it comes to the debt ceiling, and you can follow it every day if you have a mutual fund, if you own a stock, if you have a savings account, if you have a retirement account. Watch it melt away as the politicians give their speeches on Capitol Hill. It is totally irresponsible and reckless. We need to open this government. We need to pay our bills. We can sit and negotiate everything and anything. That's the offer that's been made. Only after we've met our responsibilities. And let me also add, Speaker Boehner said last week, and some of us were relieved to hear it, there will never be a default on America's debt. He followed that up within 24 hours with a list of non-negotiable conditions before he would agree to that. That is not responsible. It is reckless. It is reckless political conduct. How can we do this to the families, businesses, to the farmers, and to our allies around the world? It is time to say, as the chaplain of the Senate did yesterday, enough is enough. It is time for grown-ups to stand up on the other side of the aisle and join grown-ups on this side of the aisle to do the right thing. Open the government, pay our bills, and sit down and honestly negotiate through these issues. Mr. President, we don't have much time. October 17th is the deadline. Today, October the 10th, we have 1 week. 1 week before the bottom falls out of our economy and economies around the world. One last word. I listened to these economists on the other side, the so-called really conservative Republican economists say it really doesn't matter. We can default. We really don't need to extend our debt ceiling. These flat earth economists are the same folks who are in denial when it comes to other scientific evidence in so many different areas. Whether it's climate change, evolution, you pick it. They're entitled to their views, as fringe as they may be, as extreme as they may be. But to think that members of Congress, members of the Senate are buying this line of baloney is hard to understand and impossible to justify to the American people. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maryland.
Mr. President, I know we've been alternating on both sides of the aisle, but I note that even with Senator Grassley's presence, may I speak, Senator? Because I think one of the things we ought to be observing here, but is at least courteous rules among ourselves. This is meant to be the greatest deliberative body in the world, and if we follow the rules and follow the regular order, follow the committee process, follow the ways through the committee process for resolving disagreement and dispute, I think we can get through this. I believe that on both sides of the aisle, there are pragmatic people devoted to this country who want to solve the two major problems that we have here facing us right this minute. That is to reopen government because we are now in the 10th day of a shutdown, and number two, meet the debt obligations of the United States of America as mandated in the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. Mr. President, I call upon my colleagues on both sides of the aisle and both sides of the dome. Let's reopen government, let's pay our bills, and let's get through the regular committee processes to solve our problems. Now, there are those on the other side of the dome in the House of Representatives that are proposing a new super committee. Well, Mr. President, we've been there and we've done that. After the 2011 crisis, when we faced our debt limit, there was a process put in place called a super committee. It went nowhere. It went nowhere, and this new idea will go nowhere as well. It is a new process that will only result in more delay. Now, I think we have 2 super committees. I call them super committees because they're great committees. They're wonderful committees. That's the Budget Committee, chaired by Senator Patty Murray and her ranking member, Senator Jeff Sessions, himself a distinguished judge from Alabama, so he knows about conflict resolution. There is the Appropriations Committee that deals with discretionary spending, chaired by me and my Vice Chairman, Senator Richard Shelby. Again, a seasoned, rock-ribbed fiscal conservative who knows how to concentrate on the bottom line so that we can be a more frugal government, but also be an effective government. Let that committee do its job. Also, there is the Finance Committee, chaired by Senator Max Baucus, and I note the Vice Chairman or Ranking Member, Senator Grassley from Iowa, is on the floor, who has an incredible history of being a compassionate conservative, and again, knows the tax code and knows the values of Iowa, which is, let's put country above party. Instead of inventing new committees and new processes, free us up to do our job. Free us up to be able to do what the committee process is meant to be able to do. For me and the Appropriations Committee, we moved all of our appropriations bills. We are ready to come to the floor. We are ready to go to conference if called up, if we have a method for being able to move. We are ready to do it. Senator Murray on the Budget Committee is ready to go to conference with the House, but 21 times she was blocked by 6 naysayers, primarily representing a Tea Party, a small faction within the Republican Party. The Republican Party, the grand old party, has traditionally understood that you maintain the values of the country, that you're fiscally conservative, but you follow the rules that were established. The rules of the Budget Committee, passed by the Senate in the Budget Control Act, says they were supposed to have their job done on April 15th. Well, we moved the budget on March 23rd, over 200 days ago, and over 20 requests to go to conference to meet with with Congressman Paul Ryan and his House counterparts to work out what should our discretionary spending be? What should our revenues be? What should we evaluate in terms of our mandatory spending, where we can take a look at it but not shrink those earned benefits like Social Security and VA that people count on and work their life for and even put their life on the line. We've got to be able to do our job. But I'll tell you what has been the latest situation that has just so shocked me. We're on the verge of being a deadbeat nation. We are on the verge of being a global deadbeat nation. What is a deadbeat? A deadbeat is someone who does not meet their financial obligations. Over the last 3 days, we've heard about how men and women who died in the line of duty serving their country, who their families are entitled to a death benefit, weren't going to get it because of a government shutdown. The Fisher family, well known for serving military families, well known and so deeply cherished, offered to step forward to pay that. The philanthropy of the United States, instead of the public responsibility of the United States. I want to thank the Fisher family for stepping forward, but my gosh, what humiliation. We're the United States of America, with the strongest and best military in the world, to honor its obligation to its own, has to borrow money for a death benefit. That is deadbeat, 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 deadbeat. I think it's humiliating. I think it's despicable. And it shows just how low we have sunk. Now, we can get it back. It's in our power, because this isn't being inflicted on us. This is what is being inflicted on us by other Americans sworn to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America. And when they took that obligation, they didn't take that obligation to just uphold the amendments they like the second one, but they took that obligation to uphold all of the amendments. And let's start with the 14th, which said that the debt of the United States of America should not be called into question. That says clearly in the Constitution, hey, world, no matter what, America will pay its bills. The reliability of the United States of America to meet its debt obligations is the financial glue that helps hold the global economy together. Now, I'm not going to go into doomsday and Armageddon or whatever, but if you actually read what the ambassadors of China and Japan, one a great ally and the other a formidable competitor, says, we are holding your debt, pay your bills, or a fiscal crisis will begin to unravel in your country and around the world. We cannot be a deadbeat nation. If we are a superpower, we must first of all show our power by meeting our financial obligations. Now, how we get our public house in order by reducing our public debt is the subject, again, of the Appropriations Committee, the Budget Committee, and the Finance Committee. We have the capability to do it. I'm really calling upon my friends on the other side of the aisle, and there are many. And it's not that we're pals, it's that we've come together out of mutual respect, solving mutual problems, being of help to each other mutually, that we've been able to keep the government functioning and doing it in a way that is smart and affordable. So I say, please, let's reopen government. I'm calling upon the House to pass the Senate continued fiscal funding resolution that would reopen government till November 15th. In that process, to lay the groundwork for resolving our appropriations bills and canceling sequester. And I call upon the Senate here, those 6 that are blocking us meaning the Senate, from going to the Budget Committee to do this. Those are 2 simple acts within our power to do it. I hope that we can do it. I had intended today to really speak about how the shutdown is affecting Maryland. We are really being hard hit. We are really being hard hit. Maryland and Virginia is the largest concentration of federal agencies, both civilian and military, in America. And gee, we're proud of that. We are really proud of that. We're so proud of the fact that we have the National Institutes of Health, the Food and Drug Administration, the National Institutes of Standards that works with our private sector that enables us to sell products around the world. We're so proud of the fact that we have the Nuclear Regulatory Agency, the Consumer Product Safety, to make sure that we are looking out for things large and small, whether it's to make sure that our mattresses are not flammable and that our cribs and swimming pools are safe for our children. I'm proud of those agencies. And I'm sorry that my federal employees are not working. It is having a terrible impact on the Maryland economy. Both our comptroller and our governor is talking about the significant amount of lost revenue that we're having because people aren't working and they aren't buying. If you talk to small business where these agencies are located, it is just terrible. I just want to tell the presiding officer one story. The Social Security Administration. It's headquartered in Maryland, in a community called Woodlawn, a wonderful community, vibrant, civic engagement, just great. Across the street from the Social Security Agency is a small business called the Salsa Grill, usually crowded with lunch hour people, early morning coffee, those little baby showers that we women like to have, or a birthday party the guys are throwing for one of their pals at lunchtime. The Salsa Grill last Friday, instead of 30 customers, had 3. The owner was quoted as saying, if the shutdown goes on much longer, he won't be able to hang on any longer. This is what makes our economy great. I talked to one of the largest automobile dealers in Maryland. The showrooms were empty in the Baltimore-Washington corridor last weekend, even though they had wonderful cars, new cars, ready to do deals. The old 2013 models they wanted to move out, empty, empty, empty. This ripples through our economy. This isn't just, oh, we're going to contain government. We are hurting ourselves. So, Mr. President, the fight about Obamacare is over. Let's say goodbye to that fight. Let's get on to the fiscal issues of the United States of America. I say here, as the chair of the Appropriations Committee, I am ready to negotiate. I am ready to meet, to compromise, to see how we can have our domestic and our national and defense discretionary spending done in a way that begins to reduce our public debt, but also have a pro-growth way of public investments, making sure our country's safe, that we're building roads, building the super information highway, educating our young people, and doing research and development. I know my time is up, but I feel very strongly that we've got to solve our problem. So I want to say to the other side of the aisle, I'm ready to work together. And actually, because I've done it in the past, we actually like doing it. For we pragmatists to get into a room, solve problems, give and take, and actually learn from each other. And I could give many examples of that. But right now, we need to set the example for the world that we are the greatest deliberative body. We got to get back to deliberating instead of delaying. So, Mr. President, please, for the House, pass the continuing funding resolution. For the Senate, lift your objection to the Budget Committee going into conference. Let's reopen the government. Let's pay our bills, and let's sit down and negotiate the way a great nation is worthy of, and let's honor the Constitution of the United States.
Mr. President.
Senator from Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I appreciate the comments by the distinguished chair of the Appropriations Committee. As she said, she's ready to meet, ready to negotiate, ready to compromise, ready to work together. And so, Mr. President, I come today to say that tomorrow Republican senators are finally going to get a chance to talk with President Obama about reopening the government and dealing with the debt that this nation has and dealing with the debt limit. Until very recently, Mr. President, President Obama has been far more interested in speaking with the press than in actually speaking with Republicans. And so we had this invitation to the White House, and then this morning in the Washington Post, what the administration says, it's in the front page article, continues over to page 4. It says the White House emphasized that Obama will not be negotiating. We have the chairman of the Appropriations Committee who said, I'm ready to meet, to negotiate, to compromise, and the President of the United States says, the White House says that Obama will not be negotiating. So the question is, why are we going over to the White House in the first place if the President is not interested in negotiating? Is it just to give him a photo op? I went to meetings like that during the health care debate more than 3 years ago, Mr. President. The President at the time would invite Republicans to a meeting, and then he would reject every idea that we would offer. If he had been more willing to accept Republican ideas, negotiate then, we would have had a bipartisan health reform bill that was accepted by the American people instead of a law that continues to have more people opposed than in favor of. And that's going to be my message to the President tomorrow morning when we meet. This needs to be a real discussion, a real negotiation when we agree on how we can reopen the government, reduce our debt, and help our economy grow. This is the 6th time in 5 years that President Obama has requested an increase in the debt ceiling. So how much is he asking for? According to the Majority Leader, I understand it's $1 trillion to extend between now until after the 2014 election. Well, that's an incredible amount of money, and just trying to figure out how much money that is, it's over $1 million a minute. $1 million every minute between now and 14 months from now. The President needs to realize that's unsustainable. We have a $17 trillion debt. It's a debt on the back of our children and our grandchildren. When we have families all across the country that have aspirations, anxieties, and anger about even the idea that their children and grandchildren will be able to get careers, get jobs. If we as a nation are going to incur more debt, we also have to find real savings. We cannot continue to increase our credit card debt, another new credit card after the President has maxed out the last one, and just send that bill to the American people. It is time to set priorities. We want to get moving on real solutions, not just to our short-term problems, but the long-term issues that face us as a nation as we try to work together in governing this nation. The House of Representatives has passed 12 individual continuing resolutions. 12 individual continuing resolutions. These bills would open up many different parts of the government right now. Things that we all agree should be kept operating. The House voted to pay for things like FEMA, Head Start, National Institute of Health, open our national parks. Those bills have been sent to the Senate. They have been sitting here without action at all. Now, here in the Senate, I know a lot of Democrats are saying they support these functions. I mean, it's interesting when you go and see this picture on the front page of the Washington Post this morning with the mayor, Mayor Vincent Gray, the mayor of Washington, D.C., on the steps of the Capitol talking to the Majority Leader, saying, sir, we're not a department of the government. We're simply trying to be able to spend our own money. And yet the Majority Leader, who is blocking these votes to allow the District of Columbia to do what they are requesting and what the House has said, yes, they should be able to do, the Majority Leader saying, don't screw it up, okay? Don't screw it up. Mr. President, the Majority Leader continues to object to votes on these bills. History supports bipartisan actions of the House and not the stonewalling of the President and the Democrat leadership in the Senate. In the middle of the last government shutdown, Congress passed and President Clinton signed laws to allow a wide variety of specific programs to function. It's a precedent that we should be following today. Now, the President also keeps saying that he won't negotiate on the debt limit. He tries to make people believe that never before has Congress included, quote, issues that have nothing to do with the budget and nothing to do with the debt, close quote, this is the President's quote, into its negotiation over the debt limit. Now, again, the facts are not on the President's side. Even the fact checker in the Washington Post gave the President 4 Pinocchios on that claim, essentially saying it was completely untrue. Negotiations have actually occurred many times on the debt limit. From 1978 until 2013, the debt limit has been raised 53 times. Of those votes, the debt ceiling increase was linked to something else more than half the time. So, more than half of the debt limit increase votes since 1978 carried other provisions. They were not, as the President claims, clean increases. Now, the President wants to ignore that history. The President wants to pretend that raising the debt limit is something that has to be done without any deliberations, negotiations, dissent, and on his terms alone. He says he will not negotiate at all. Well, it's strange to be coming from his mouth because it's a very different position that came out of his mouth when he was Senator Obama. And that wasn't that many years ago. In 2006, Senator Obama voted against a debt limit increase because he said it was a sign that Washington can't pay its bills. Senator Obama complained that the federal debt had increased by $5 trillion in 5 years. Well, under President Obama, Washington's debt has grown by more than $6 trillion in 4 years. Senator Obama said the more we depend on foreign nations to lend us money, he said, the more our economic security is tied to the whims of foreign leaders whose interests might not be aligned with ours. Under President Obama, foreign holdings of federal debt have increased by 82%. Senator Obama said that Washington is shifting the burden of bad choices today onto the backs of our children and grandchildren. He said at the time, America has a debt problem and a failure of leadership. A debt problem and a failure of leadership. Well, President Obama is now asking for his 6th increase in debt in less than 5 years. Why is this then not a debt problem and a failure of leadership? Senator Obama was right to say at the time we have a debt problem. President Obama should remember what made him say that in 2006 and do something about it now. He should join Republicans willing to talk about real entitlement reform as part of negotiations over raising the debt ceiling. He should be willing and anxious to talk about his health care law and how it's going to become a major factor driving Washington's debt even higher in the future if we don't replace it with responsible reforms today. The President should embrace bipartisan continuing resolutions passed by the House as a way of reopening as much of the government as possible while we have responsible and reasonable discussions, deliberations, and negotiations. President Obama should stop posturing, stop playing games, and stop punishing the American people as he has been doing under this current government shutdown. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Republican whip.
Mr. President, yesterday we learned that...
We are in a quorum call.
I beg your pardon, Mr. President. I'd ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be rescinded.
Without objection.
Mr. President, yesterday we learned that for the remainder of the government shutdown that one of America's great charitable organizations, the Fisher House Foundation, will provide survivor benefits to military families who've lost a loved one on the field of battle. Fisher House is a really just almost too good to believe wonderful charity that has helped military families all across our country, including folks in 7 different facilities in Texas, from the VA North Texas healthcare system to the William Beaumont Army Medical Center in El Paso, the Carl R. Darnell Army Medical Center, the Michael DeBakey VA Medical Center, to the Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, Wilford Hall Ambulatory Surgical Center, and the South Texas Veterans Healthcare System. I personally want to extend my thanks and express my gratitude to Fisher House for making such a tremendous commitment to our military heroes and making for such a generous offer for the families of the fallen. Secretary Hagel was quoted when he announced that Fisher House was going to fill the gap left by the cutoff of federal funds. He was quoted as saying he was offended, outraged, embarrassed that the government shutdown had prevented the Defense Department from fulfilling the most sacred responsibility in a timely manner. Well, I agree with his outrage and a sense of offense and embarrassment, but I want to recall how we got here. If our friends across the aisle had simply agreed to delay the individual mandate and to eliminate the special congressional carve-out under Obamacare, this never would have happened. We've now reached day 10 of the shutdown,
Over the last week and a half, administration officials have done as much as they possibly can to make this shutdown as painful as possible. They made the decision to barricade the World War II memorials and monuments along the National Mall, hoping to keep our veterans, many near the end of their lives, for whom these monuments were built as a way of honoring their sacrifice. They've kept these barricades in their way to try to impede or perhaps prevent them from visiting things like the World War II memorial. And the Obama administration, we know, has temporarily closed or interfered with privately run parks and historic sites like the Claude Moore Colonial Farm in Northern Virginia. Now, why would the administration, in order to turn up the heat or increase the pain of the shutdown, impose itself to shut down a privately run park? Well, there's a reason for that, and it is because this is a cynical game, not one designed to get to a solution, but one to gain political advantage. And we simply, it should be offensive, embarrassing, and outrageous, to use the words of Secretary Hagel, for a political party to try to use this shutdown for such craven political gain. Well, meanwhile, our Democratic friends have refused to support legislation that would reopen our memorials and national parks, that would fund the National Institutes of Health. I heard the distinguished Assistant Majority Leader come to the floor a few days ago and decry the fact that cancer research for children was being temporarily stopped because of the shutdown. We've come to the floor and offered a bill that would reopen it along with clinical trials, and it's been refused by our Democratic colleagues. And we've said, and the House has passed these bills, we've come to the floor and said, well, let's fund the Veterans Administration to make sure that that backlog of disability claims gets taken care of. And so our veterans who've given so much and sacrificed so much don't have to wait on getting their disability claims processed. Well, that was objected to by the Majority Leader. And they've also objected to funding our military reserves. As I said, they seem intent on maximizing the pain in hopes of gaining political advantage. That's outrageous. That's embarrassing, should be embarrassing. Well, before I conclude, I just want to say to all of the military families out there who've lost a son, a daughter, a husband, a wife, a father, or mother on the field of battle, I want to leave you with the words of a great American president who said, "I pray that our Heavenly Father may assuage the anguish of your bereavement and leave you only the cherished memory of the loved and lost and the solemn pride that must be yours to have laid so costly a sacrifice upon the altar of freedom." Mr. President, those noble and inspiring words and that prayer is the type of tribute we should be giving to those families who've lost loved ones on the field of battle, not the sort of short-sighted political treatment that's been given by the efforts across the aisle to shut down every reasonable opportunity to alleviate some of this hardship and to mitigate some of the pain. We've done it successfully together when it comes to paying our uniformed active duty military. We got a unanimous consent agreement between the parties to make sure that our active duty troops are getting paid. So why is it we can't do the same thing with these survivors of those who's lost their lives on the field of battle? Yesterday, when I asked unanimous consent for the Majority Leader to agree to that piece of legislation, he asked to delay consideration of that request until the Defense Department could announce their proposal with the Fisher House. Well, again, I commend the Fisher House for stepping up and trying to fill the void, but why should we not do our job? Why should Congress not act? We should act. And I hope very soon we can do our job and honor these fallen and their families in an appropriate way by coming together as Republicans and Democrats and making sure that these survivor benefits to those who've lost, to the families who've lost loved ones on the field of battle are paid on a timely basis without being caught up in the political games occurring inside of the halls of Congress.
Mr. President.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, may I ask